All right, I got my man Bret Huth on here today. Very excited. Me and Bret, me and Coach go back to what was it, 2014 when you came up, Coach, and visited me in Akron there.
Yep, yep. I found out you were a fellow OAC guy.
Yes, sir.
Um, so just being able to come back to my hometown and stop in and chat up with the guy that played D3 ball and been a part of that process and then how difficult those situations were. And it was just a good way to get connected and meet just a good dude first and foremost, but a great strength coach too. So
Yeah, I mean, I think we spent maybe 2 hours together, and this is when I mean, we were both super green back then, but I was really green, just kind of getting into it, and we talked a lot about movement. We had a lot of the same similar ideas, but I think it was 2 hours, and we both kind of knew we were very like minded, and it's definitely been fun keeping up and watching your journey. So what you were 2012, you were at Cal then?
now 2012, let me see. Okay, so I was at Louisiana Monroe from
That's right. That's right.
I was at Louisiana Monroe from 10 to 13. I was at University of Memphis from 13 to 14, and then Cal from 14 to 17 ish, and then I was at Rice until um, 18, and then came here to UIW 18, 19. This is my second season here.
Now you Yax was head guy at Rice when you were there. Yax.
No, sir, no. Yax had already been gone. It was Tedford.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. Where is he now?
So right now he's actually working on the private side. He's with oh shoot, company out of El Paso, Texas, that does racks. I can't think of the name of it. I'm drawing a blank. But he's doing that. He's enjoying it. He's able to stay in Houston with his family, so they didn't have to move again because they've kind of made a handful of moves in a short period of time, so allowed
Yeah.
him to kind of stay at home base. So
Well, good. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm always, and I've said this a few times since I've been recording stuff. I'm always envious of. I mean, obviously, it's funny that it's kind of twofold. Of people are always saying, "Oh, it's crazy you got into a director role so quick." And in my mind, I'm always like, "Man, I'm kind of envious of the guy that's got to travel around a little bit and see, and has got to see guys do it differently." And you've definitely made your trips. You've been around a
no
little bit.
doubt about it.
And
Yeah.
then now you're in the role to where you've gotten to put it all together. You've had years to develop. You've seen different people do it differently, and now you're running your own show. Um, and so I think guys like you, I like to pick your guys' brains so much because I think you have such a unique perspective of how you've done that. So taking over this year, I mean, I would imagine you've kind of had some realization of really who has impacted you the most, what has impacted your philosophy the most, and kind of shaped you to the coach you are. So as you were writing this and you've started taking over and you've done your own program and now you're pretty deep into being at UIW and everything. What and who has been your biggest influences on coaching, philosophy, training, the whole nine yards?
To be honest, I'm not going to put my finger on just one of those experiences, just because
Yep.
they've all been so different, and not any of them have been wrong. Obviously, we talk about there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, but there's different things that I've taken from different coaches and different scenarios, and there's a lot of other things that always come into the picture with who's the head coach that they're working for, how much does the head coach have their fingers involved in the game. There's a lot of different perspectives that come into that picture. So I'd say that in my time with John Greco at ULM, a big piece I got with Greek was how he handled the players, how he showed the kids that he loved the kids, cared for them, had a general interest in their lives, and then how at this very same time he loved the kids, but he held them to a very distinct standard, and that was kind of one of my biggest takeaways of from Greek. And then Rourke Cutchlow at the University of Memphis, extremely organized in everything he does, down to the most minute detail. Um, that was probably one of my greatest takeaways from him. And then the time I spent with Damon Harrington at Cal, a big piece of what he kind of instilled in that team was a very specific mindset of how they train, how they play the game. Um, and then very same time, working with Coach Tedford at Rice, it was kind of the almost an exact opposite side, from a standpoint of putting so much on the actual coach, more so putting it on the player. Like, this is your responsibility. Your development is we're gonna line you up for success, but you're the one that's responsible. You're the one putting in the work. So I've got all these different perspectives in terms of how these different coaches I work for handled their players, handled just the general system in itself. And to be completely honest, I wouldn't say that like or dislike any of them. There's different things I've kept on my plate, and there's certain things I've scraped off my plate. I think it's kind of well-rounded my perspective to what, in my opinion, is the best way for me to handle it. And uh, how I do it here doesn't necessarily mean is how I would do it somewhere else, because you always have to take consideration your staff, your facility, the coaching staff you work for, the players you have, their previous experiences, their general perception of who you are walking in the door versus who you want to be perceived as well. So I don't think it's cookie cutter. I don't think it's one size fits all. But that's kind of like, I guess, the more so the culture side and just handling business, which obviously is important. But in terms of like my training philosophy, um, I think where I really started to kind of trend in the direction that I've gone now was when I first got the cow and was working side by side with Saul Wasser. Saul Wasser is one of my best friends in the profession, and he kind of really got me in tune with Charlie Francis, vertical integration, high-low model, and some of the concepts all seemed to kind of make sense to me before I even began to dive into Charlie. And obviously, we're talking about a track and field coach, but his system is so applicable to how we can handle stress and apply stress on athletes. It made the most sense, and that's kind of had, in my opinion, one of the biggest influences in terms of how I do things. But I think a combination of vertical integration through Charlie Francis, block periodization through Isherin, which like some may say they're very conflicting in nature, but some of those thought processes in terms of certain sequences of training that one may precede the other, the central, secondary, and tertiary training qualities should still be in alignment of working from general to specific. And that's the concept of specificity is where Bondarchuk starts to kind of play into it. So I'd say through reading, and I'd say some of my influences are Charlie, Bondarchuk, and Isherin. And then another big piece of how I think about things from a numbers perspective is all the work that Gabbett has put into this thing from player load management. And a lot of people look at that only through the lens of what's happening on the field via data collection. But I think some of those perspectives can be taken into consideration, like what's happening in the weight room as well. So I think those have had large influences on how I prescribe training, how I move from one block of training to the next, and how I really how I handle stress, especially in the in-season period. In terms of, we know at that time of the year, the central training effect is technical, tactical, sport specificity, and then for us on our end, really absolute strength and active recovery. I mean, to me, those are the most important things that we can develop at this time. That's what we can control.
No doubt. What is so you make all those stops, you talk about all those influences you have. What has been your, I guess like if you're talking to Coach McNally right now and you're trying to give him advice of, hey, you're going to be a director someday and you need to gather information so that you're prepared to take this role in 4 years, in 5 years. What did you do as you were making these stops? What have you done as you've read Bondarchuk, as you've talked to Saul Wasser? What did you do to prepare yourself for when you took over Incarnate Word? What do you look back on and say, man, I did that well, that prepared me for this job?
Things is to not always think you have it figured out, because I'm sure there's times where he looks at or hears something that you say and maybe he doesn't completely agree with it in that specific instance. But there's always, again, it's if you kind of step back and think about maybe the reason behind why you handled a certain situation that way, there's more to it than meets the eye. So I think instead of just always jumping to conclusions based on your own self thoughts. The thing about why did Sleeve handle that situation that specific way? Maybe write it down and visit with them afterwards. Hey, um, you know, this is how you handle this situation with athlete A. In my opinion, I would have handled it this way. Why would you have gone that way? So, opposed to writing off how a coach does things, maybe kind of dig into the why behind it. And this, in my opinion, is something that I didn't do a good job of. One of my stops, I think, I really disagreed with some of the things that were going on. I didn't believe in exactly what was being done, how some things were handled, and kind of when I moved on from that job, and if I were to step back and take a breath and let my ego be taken out of the equation completely, at that point in time, what did I know about all the other variables that were involved in some of those conversations, or how training was handled or prescribed. There's so much more to it. So what I'd say is just never write anything off. Always take in perspective the bigger picture, see the forest through the trees, and then if you have a question, write it down. I mean, because some of those things on the fly, you wonder why, but then the group finishes up. You guys handle all your business on the back end of the group, and by that time, you've already forgotten about it. So just always have something to write with. And that's one of the biggest things I took away from Ward Cutchlow is you should always have something to write with, whether it's something that a coach says or a player does. It's great to keep a track record of those things, and you can revisit on it at the end of the day, end of the week.
What was the biggest thing when you got to Incarnate Word that you took over, you started your own program, and you were like, man, this is different. Like sitting in that chair, what was the biggest thing that you sat down and you were like, boy, this is different than what I've done the last 7 years?
I think at that point, I mean, it's all on you. And a lot of the places that I worked at, I was blessed enough to be with Damon Harrington, for instance, at Cal, and Damon let me and Saul Wasser have a huge part to do with what happened on the whiteboard prior to getting into um, laying out what we were going to do over a period of training. He let me and Sal bring our ideas to the table, and obviously it wasn't just me and Sal's ideas or just Damon's ideas. There's a culmination of the three, but the fact that he let us do those things then when we were younger strength coaches, it was a great opportunity for us. But at that point in time, when I sat down in that chair, you walk in the door, especially depending on the situation you walk into, whether you come in with your own staff and people that you've been around and trust and know, or you inherit a brand new staff that you've never met, as I did at UIW. And that's 100% on you at that point. And you've got to take your previous experiences and you got to on the fly evaluate where this program stands. What type of athletes do we have? What are some needs like on the front end of things that need to be accomplished? How does that get accomplished in the current facility? How does that get accomplished again with a staff that maybe doesn't quite understand my perspective initially? So just a lot of those things that this happen so fast. You've just got to be able to almost at that point trust your instinct and act on it.
For sure. I think one of the things I realized when I got here was I took for granted so much at Akron just being there for 7 years because I knew those athletes so well. I knew what their deficiencies were. I knew what their mental deficiencies were. I knew how they bent, I knew how they responded to training. And so it was like clockwork. Everything was very easy towards the end there as far as training and you name it. When I got here, I didn't realize how much of a role that played when I got here, and I didn't know movement patterns of 105 athletes. I didn't know that 3 sets of 10 reverse hyper would blow them up for 2 weeks. I didn't
Yeah,
know that doing 5 or 3 sets of 5 tempo runs at 75% would have 3 guys pull their hamstrings. I didn't know I didn't know those things,
yeah,
and I just think the value of like when you get to a place trying to unpack all of that and get to know your athletes mentally, spiritually, physically as quickly as humanly possible is probably the one thing that I would go back and it's not that I wasn't making the effort to do that. It's just I was probably a month in before I was like, damn, it really helps when you like know the ins and outs of everything and even just how much easier it is right now writing the program for 2020 versus what it was like, because that's what you're doing, right? You're guessing, like you're saying, for the most part, I'm guessing this is where we are, this is what we need, and let's go figure it out.
Yeah,
But just how helpful it's been, just even just the last 10 months or 9 months, just learning these guys movement patterns, their deficiencies, what they need as a team, the whole 9 yards. I think that was definitely something that I didn't realize how helpful that was.
absolutely.
Did
And
you
another,
experience that year two?
no, well, yeah, year one, I'm 100% with you. I mean, and that goes along like no different. Like you talked about, just doing something as simple as tempo runs and having a couple of guys have some hamstring tweaks. I mean, you have no concept of what these athletes' level of preparedness is, walking in the door at all. In addition to the fact that you've got a head ball coach who probably wants to see the new strength coach that he just hired put these guys to work. So there's a fine line that you have to balance in terms of those things. And is you call it wrong, but at the end of the day, that is what it is. You know as well as I do. They don't want to. A football coach doesn't want to walk in the door and see everything as just completely instructional and PVCs and an hour long warm up before they even get to any type of work. So I think those things all have to be taken into consideration with also how the athlete thinks too. Like okay, new coaching staff's here. I'm going to do everything I can to impress these coaches. And where you talk about running something as simple as a tempo run at 75%. Well, for them, maybe it wasn't 75% just because
Right.
they don't understand that terminology. They haven't kind of run the rope on that with you at all at that point. And maybe 75% was 90%. And
Yep.
all of a sudden that extensive tempo run becomes intensive tempo run. And the volume is inappropriate to what they're prepared to handle at the time. That's where those things start to happen. So I think you take those things into consideration coming in year two. Then the athletes they know, understand, and trust what you do, and then you have a general understanding of what those athletes have experienced physically and what they can tolerate from the jump, versus just a shot in the dark. Because again, just that shot in the dark, some of those athletes you may be undercooking, some of them you may be overcooking, others may be just right. Coming into year two, you know exactly where they've been at that point, and that's to me, that's almost like no different than managing, like again, managing training load. Whether we're talking about in the weight room or on the field, like something like 3 sets of 10 on a reverse hyper. Well, if they haven't done a reverse hyper before, all of a sudden the total amount of work that they experienced, and that it could be a huge what Gabbett calls spike in work on their posterior chain. Maybe the previous staff didn't believe in using the posterior chain developers or anything along those lines, and it makes you look like you overcooked. But again, it's just not something that walking in the door, you have no idea. So those things, in my mind, for year two, you almost set yourself up for even greater success because you know where the athletes have been and you know where the athletes are going to be going from that point forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even more so, and that's not trying to like throw previous staff under the bus or anything, but I mean, our guys had 8 weeks of a break. So
Yeah,
if they're not used to doing tempo runs, if they're not used to doing reverse hypers, and they lost the last 2 games of the 2018 season, and they had an 8 week break where they probably didn't do it. Like, so you're just adding all those things up on top of it as
absolutely.
well. So yeah, I mean, I tell you what, those first 6 months, I probably coached harder in those first 6 months than my entire career, just trying to, play catch up.
Absolutely. Yep, you're playing catch up. You're spinning your wheels as a coach, just trying to get them get them on track. For really, I mean, you think about from when you first walk in the door with the new program from January to spring ball. At that point, you're truly just trying to implement how you handle business with the athletes, establishing relationships, coaching them to your level of quality, based like the lifts that you are going to hang your hat on, the movement you're going to do on the field, you're going to hang your hat on. You're coaching your butt off on those things, all while trying to earn their trust. You're not really pushing the envelope, training how you really want to be training really until summer one hits.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, I think that's it's such a good point too. Is just developing that trust with the head coach, with the players, like you said earlier, trying to prove yourself as a strength coach. Like at the end of the day, you're getting these guys to try to buy into you. Like like, do these guys think that I know what I'm doing? And if we're just doing PVC pipe overhead squats for freaking 8 straight weeks,
Yeah.
are they gonna buy into that? And I think that's a huge piece of it too. But I'm fired up for this upcoming year of, just like you said, you lay the foundation and slow cook it, and it's exciting. I know this is an hour long question here, but in a box, kind of walk me through just, where are you mentally right now with your general training philosophy? If you kind of had to put it in a 5 minute answer, what's your general training philosophy with your guys right now?
I mean, being very simple, our titles were strength and conditioning coaches. Um, and there's obviously the mental side to that, and there's the culture side to it, but let's never get it twisted and disrespect the fact that our job is to physically develop these athletes
Yeah.
and physically develop them specifically for their sport. I mean, to me, that's the biggest take home question for me is are you actually developing your athletes? And you spent the gist of your career at the MAC, and then you played at Mount Union, and then I played at John Carroll, so two D3 guys, and then the gist of your career at G5, the gist of my career at the G5 now FCS level. You know as well as I do, we've got to develop these kids. A lot of the kids that walk in the door day one, they're not the product they're going to be year 3, year 4, and it can't just be mat drills, culture, and cute exercises. So to me, at the end of the day, we're here to develop athletes. That should be our first and primary responsibility as a strength and conditioning coach.
Yeah, and I think, I agree. I do think culture is a big piece of it. I think that the thing where I think some strength coaches get mixed up on it though is like, it's not our job to instill our culture. It's our job to instill the head coach's culture.
Yep.
And if you don't agree or like that culture, then you better get a different job. But I think that's is important to hear. And I think that culture plays a bigger role than physical development on that if we were to rank those things, but not in our job. That's, like I said, our job is to instill the head coach's culture,
Yep.
not our culture. And I think that's part of doing your job, and it's also part of like, it's so holistic, and it's a generalist position that we have to be. We have to manage so many different relationships um, and things along those lines. But I think it's the more I guess the last week I was sitting there and I was reading Cam Joss's new book, The Process, and talking to him and Fergus kind of about it. And like I'm a guy that always I try to rate things. But anyway, so the moral of the story is the whole book kind of talks about, technical, tactical, physical development and
Mhm.
psychological development, and kind of this realm of what are the deficiencies of that athlete. Is that athlete is he highly physical developed, but tactically he doesn't know what he's doing on the football field? And if that's the case, then we need to develop him tactically. Does he know what he's doing on the football field, but he's not technically sound? Do we need to work on his technique on the football field? And so in my mind, the first thing I start doing is I start trying to vertically rank these things. And I'm like, man, if I vertically rank these things, does my program reflect that? And so I end up kind of going through this whole thing in my head, and I'm writing down, I'm taking notes. And then I kind of realize, like, man, it's not really a vertical axis. It's a horizontal axis. Like, all of these things are important. And I don't know that you could say that one's more important than the other. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
they all have to. At the end of the day, for you to, you just said it right. Our job isn't to make these kids better weightlifters. It's our job to make them better at their sport, or give them the ability to be better at their sport.
Mhm.
That's the gift we need to give these. We need to give them the ability to improve their ability at the sport that they're playing, whatever sport that is. And that involves those kind of things. It's not just physical development. It's also mental development, or sort of psychological development. It's also tactical and technical. And I think that the more general, the more generalist we can be, I think the better in our seats, the way that we
Mhm.
have to look at things and what we have to see. I think we need to see it holistically.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
It's it's uh it's interesting, man. I'm very interested to see where it goes. So we're about halfway through in season right now, and I think this is always, when I reach out to coach or talk to coaches, I think this is pretty good point in the season to know, like, hey, is my in-season programming, is it working? Are we maintaining strength? Are we getting stronger? Are we staying healthy? Are we getting hurt? You know, are we resilient to injuries? Are we having soft tissue things? So I think this is a great time for us to have this conversation, because I know
Yeah.
one thing you and I have always talked about, and I don't know why or how we've always talked about this, but we talk about in-season training a lot, and we just
Yeah.
kind of
No
have
doubt.
the past couple of years. Um, so I guess first off, evaluating where you guys are at right now in Incarnate Word, how are you feeling about your in-season programming, about where you guys are? What parameters are you using to evaluate that, to say like, hey, yeah, I really like where this thing's going? And then just walk me through how you break everything up. What is, you know, do you have a multi-level program going on right now? Is there developmental? Is there starters? Is there, how are you training your team, literally? And then, you know, what does a program look like? Just whatever you're willing to share, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Um, so as far as where we're at, I think we're in a good place. As far as soft tissues go, we really almost non-existent. I mean, you're going to have some,
Yeah.
but the gist of it is we're in a pretty good place on that end. And as far as how we go about things, like I'll start by just talking about our first level of development, which is our travel group. So I have it broken into gray, black, and red. Gray is our travel group, and how I really think about like the gist of um, the week is we're going to consolidate stressors, um, a la Charlie Francis. Um, so Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday is kind of our days that we are with me in the weight room. Sunday is more of an extensive day where we're gonna spend the gist of our time on what we have termed the Miller complex, but Al Miller, Johnny Parker,
Yeah.
Rob Pinarello,
Yeah.
Al Vermeil, using a version of the barbell complex that they do. I kind of base it off of body weight norms in the ballpark of 30 to 50% body weight. And we just linearly increase set volume until we reach our peak week for that, which is working up to 4 total sets. And then following the deload, we then transition those percentages based off of body weight up another tier and kind of restart from the bottom 2 sets, 3 sets, 4 sets. So just a linear progression on that end. And the traditional Miller complex muscle snatch. There's like high pull, muscle snatch, back squat to press, bent over row, RDL shrug.
Yeah.
For us, and to me, the reason there's 2 reasons why I love it on Sundays. Everything that's in it they're all your I guess the movement qualities that we look to train in the weight room. They're all involved in something as simple and extensive as a barbell complex without putting the bar down. So we're restoring hinge, squat, press, pull, all at once, all while promoting a ton of blood flow without taking the guys outside and running them after they just played 60 minutes of football the night before. And it's something that also has if you look at the total tonnage of work done, there's a bunch of work being done. It's an opportunity for us to try and stimulate some type of hypertrophic response to hold on to lean mass, hold on to some body armor in the in-season period. As we know, the stress, nutrition, lack thereof sleep that comes with this time of year, we're trying to do everything we possibly can to hold on to as much of that lean mass as possible to keep our guys healthy, keep them strong, keep them performing at their highest level on the back end of the year, especially, I mean, at the FCS level. It's closer to what you really know the most about in your time at the D3 level, because you guys were always competing in the national championship. You play a 10-game season, you go into playoffs. And no deal with the FCS. Same deal with the FCS level versus the Group of 5 level. For the most part, you're at best you're looking at a bowl game. You can be a Group of 5 school and go undefeated and still not even make it to the college football playoff. If we look at UCF, so obviously we want to make sure that our guys are performing at their highest level at the end of the season still. So that's one reason why I think that's so great for us. Putting that in some extensive work on Sundays, and some other things that I think are important for us on Sundays to consider is that for us, Monday is our off day. Monday being our off day, it's the one day that I know that I can work to hold on to some of that eccentric hamstring strength that we spend all year developing I guess, not just maintain those things, but to continue to develop them, but at the minimum effective dose for that time of year, and to plug it in on a day, we don't have to worry about the guys going out sprinting thereafter.
Yep.
I know they're going to get at least 48 hours before coming into some type of sprint exposure. So following the Miller complex, we'll come into some RDLs, and for my RDL volume and squat volume for the in-season period, it's about lays right around 25% of the volume that we would usually carry in a loading period. And for me, it allows me to push the intensities that I find necessary, again, at the minimum effective dose to touch those qualities of absolute strength without creating too much, I guess, damage or fatigue to the tissue. So for us, 6 reps is when we're talking work sets for RDL and squat for the entire in-season period. 6 reps is right at 25% of what we'd usually be prescribing for the gist of our year in a loading period. So we know that's a stress that our guys have been exposed to repeatedly, and then it's something that they can recover from. And again, especially at my, like for us, there is no tracking GPS training load. That's not something that's going to fit into the budget here at the FCS level, or most FCS schools, specifically my situation. So I have to control what I can control. And if I think that that's an important quality for me to train all year round, why wouldn't I train it in season when it matters the most? I just need to make sure that I do so in a manner that our kids can recover from. So my guys are typically training right in that 24 to 25 rep range in a general loading period. By prescribing 25% of that, I know that's something that my guys can not only train at the levels of intensity that I look to touch, where we're going to touch 90% or some form of 90% via accommodating resistance every 3 to 5 weeks. So that's I guess the next big piece of what our Sundays look like. And then we kind of go into some more extensive unilateral work in ballpark 65 to 75%. And I prescribe it as double the loading volume for squat and press. So I do a single arm dumbbell incline press, and I do a suitcase Polican split squat. And the volume is, again, double the volume that I prescribe for the intensive days. And obviously the loads are, they're not exaggerated by any means, but it's a way for us to kind of hold on to some lean mass, hold on to some type of volume, and allows us, the Polican split squat allows us to train over a very long range of motion that you really can't acquire with the barbell back squat. So as far as keeping ankles and knees healthy, we find it's a big bang for our buck exercise. And then we kind of follow that up with just some GPP-esque movements, do some manual eccentric groin, some TRX rows, some form of a carry, and then we hit our Nordics. And kind of how that progression, the Nordics, again, very basic linear progression, minimum effective dose at the start of camp. And then we kind of build up to that point where we're going to hold somewhere in the ballpark of about 10 reps over the course of our loading period before coming into a deload. And then Mondays are off day. We practice in the mornings throughout the week.
Yep.
So that's one thing that I've never actually experienced prior to coming to UIW. And to be honest, there's parts of it that I'm not a fan of. Obviously, it does affect the amount of sleep our guys get. There's no doubt about it. That's why, preaching with the choir in terms of like eating, sleeping, and hydrate. That really, our motto is eat, sleep, hydrate. It's simple. It's to the point. It's the 3 most important qualities that we need to consider when we're talking about recovery. But it does affect sleep. There's no doubt about it when the guys are showing up for meetings at 6 a.m. on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays. But the side of the coin that I do like is the fact that all of our training in the weight room happens after practice opposed to before practice.
Yeah.
And again, right, wrong, or indifferent, if you practice in the afternoons or early evenings, it means that your strength training is happening earlier in the day, and you're going to come across the coach. And luckily, the coach I work for is not who he is in any way, shape, or form. He doesn't micromanage. He lets me be the strength and conditioning professional. But you're going to run into those cases where some coaches are going to question why you're doing something prior to practice. and that's one thing that I never have to deal with. The fact that we always follow
Have to, yeah.
practice with training. So Tuesdays kind of are more, again, consolidation of stressors. So Tuesdays are more intense practice day, and Tuesdays are more intense, I guess, day in the weight room. And I guess all of the days are somewhat total body in nature, but the Tuesday lift has a little bit more of a lower body emphasis, while the Wednesday is a little bit more of an upper body emphasis. Tuesday we'll do our like primary derivative of the clean that we're working. Like for example, right now, and as I progress through the season, I have like tiers of, I guess, like progression through regression,
Right.
as as the cumulative fatigue, the attrition rate of the season kind of carries on and accumulates. I try to peel the apple back in some way, shape, or form. So you'd start with, for the most part, our powers. We'd start our warm-ups with combos, fulls, and powers. And then we transition to where we are now. We're doing combo 2+1s, 2 powers plus 1 clean pull. And then
Yep.
coming into this next deload, it'll be to the point where we're at 1 power, 2 pulls. So just some type of, again, progression through regression. But we live somewhere in the ballpark of about 70 to 80% of the training intensity there. Uh, it's kind of the sweet spot for me, where I spend a lot of my training over the course of the entire year. Really kind of lives in that 70 to 80 range for the most part. If you look at all the volume of our rep counts, you'd say that a big piece of it kind of falls in that bracket. Um, and then that's the day that we squat. So again, similar to how we load the RDL, we're going to touch 90 every 3 to 5 weeks, depending on how the mesocycles break up. And how that kind of started in fall camp was with the back squat, and then we eventually moved to the safety bar squat. We've got SS yokes on every rack, and then from the SS yoke, after we hit our peak week and deloaded there, we transitioned to band accommodating resistance with the Performex. I think you guys have Performex out there as well, right?
We just got it put in, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great tool. It's extremely easy to implement.
Love the
You know,
picture too.
you know exactly what you're getting. It's almost like using chains. You know what you're getting at the top. So I've got our guys bracketed into different groups based off of their training max. So I kind of plan it out to where, again, in that peak week, they're going to get 90% at the top, and it's going to be somewhere in the ballpark of 30%, 20 to 30% accommodating resistance. And it's going to put them in that ballpark of 90-ish%. I prescribe a like a range, and
Yep.
within that range, I've got I got tendo units set up on all of them, and I have through those sets, I have all the tendo units facing me in the room, and it allows me to kind of evaluate how the guys are moving for that given day. And the most important thing is always is the coach's eye first before you staring at a computer screen. But that just kind of gives me a general idea of what their readiness is that day. I know what their preparedness is. And if they're not expressing on that given day, I'm not going to overcook them. So I use that as a means to kind of justify, hey, I want you to kind of live somewhere in the bottom to the middle of your range for these sets where, some guys were cooked when the frying pan is hot. That bar is moving faster than it should be. It allows me to tell them, hey, I want you to stay somewhere between the middle and top of your range. If someone's just absolutely crushing it, hey, we're going to be at the top of the range for today.
It was a big takeaway from, we talked about this. So maybe it was camp. We talked about this, but like kind of camp, we're always with your RDLs and how you progress your posterior chain volume in season is like my philosophy has always been like hang on for dear life and just try to not lose posterior chain strength, maybe sneak in some Nordics here and there. And then you kind of talked about when we were texting in season about how you actually you try to build some strength and build some eccentric strength in, and you just work it up very very gradually. And so I was like, all right, it made sense to me. At the training camp we just survived because volumes, but as soon as we got into after that first deload week in season, so I would just cap it. So like right now we're doing a complex, and I don't want to switch some movements because I don't want to create any excess stressors. But
Yeah.
every on our heavy day in the weight room, we'll hit one set of 3 single leg RDL, one set of bilateral RDL, and one set of a Nordic hamstring. But every 4 week block, we've increased the cap of those RDLs.
Mhm.
Which I mean, we didn't have a ton of posterior strength. We didn't do a lot of RDLs before I got here. So, I would say, like 225 was quite the endeavor for one of our athletes on an RDL
Mhm.
going into the season. Like it was something that I was like, man, we really need to get on this. But so just gradually, that first block, our cap was 225, then it was 245, then it was 265, now it's 285, and it's not creating any soreness. The guys,
Absolutely.
it's only 3 reps, but you look at it just like that. 90% of our team has taken their 3 rep RDL in season max, if that's what you want to call it, from 225 to 285 just by following that philosophy that you talked about. And I think I've had a huge just whatever you said when we were talking just like clicked and made sense to me. And I'm like, just don't be scared. They're fine. They're not. You're doing 9 total freaking reps. Like let's
Yep.
roll. And just by following that, we've had so much success with our posterior chain development. Now I know there's a cap to that, and I get that. I know we're not going to experience that same level of increasing next season because the foundation will be more laid. But
Yep.
we're knocking out work now that I wasn't anticipating knocking out until February, and I think that was a huge thing I took away from you. I don't know, maybe that was in season when or in training camp when we
Yeah,
talked
it's
about
during
that.
camp. Yeah.
Yeah,
Again, I think like when you like set like base parameters, like where I talk about like 25% of volume for RDL and squat and 40% for our clean derivatives and for our pressing derivatives. Um, if you set those standards from the jump, as you kind of progress in intensity, the total amount of work, the total like poundage, tonnage, however you look at it, they're marginal increases to where you're not going to create so much stress that's going to cause them to walk out in the field and have that additional soreness that may have come from that stress you've applied. So it allows you to continue to just again, it's a much more gradual, like slower approach to training, but it still allows you to train, not to be afraid to train in season. It allows you to push the qualities that you think are so important to push year round. Just doing so with the minimum effective dose. 'Cause we know the volume that matters that time of year is what's happening on the field. It's
on the field.
technical,
Yep.
tactical, sport specificity. So, like you said, we're trying to hang on for dear life um, for as much of the strength stimulus as we possibly can without letting it interfere with what's actually happening on the field.
Yeah.
So just by taking like looking at, okay, this is what these guys were able to tolerate in June and July training. This is what our volume of work looked like. Okay, what level of reduction of that can we then use to kind of set a baseline for fall camp, and then building that into the in-season model. And then from that point, the only real adjustments in training load that are happening in your control, because again, you don't write the sport practices. Okay, um, the only undulations are really how you apply intensity in the weight room. And for us, like we know that retaining those levels of strength, they're not just going to be for your offensive lineman to be able to move defensive linemen. That's not why we do those things. It's so multifaceted to the fact we're talking about guys staying healthy. We're talking about sprinting performance, producing soft tissue injuries. There's so many different qualities that all come from that foundation of strength that we're trying to hold on to that time of year, and
Yeah.
it allows you to do that without being afraid to do your job.
Yeah. Talking about sleep too, like you're talking about, and I'm just still just thinking about what I would prefer. And I love the morning schedule, and it's all I've ever done. I've actually never, at Mount Union we were an afternoon school, but so on the playing side I never did the morning thing, and on the coaching side I've never done the afternoon thing. But I kind of always looked at it like athlete A, athlete B. Athlete A, who does all things the right way, takes care of their body, gets in the tubs, eats the right things. Athlete B, who you're constantly trying to pull on their ear to get in for recovery and regeneration and to do the right amount of weight and do those kind of things. I feel like athlete A is always going to find a way to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep most of the time. I feel like athlete B, whether you practice at 8 a.m., 6 a.m., or 4 p.m., is probably going to get 6 to 4 hours of sleep every night. Because if you give him more time, he's just going to go out and party or play video games all night, anyways.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that I'm as worried about that as I was when I initially started coaching a morning school.
Mhm.
But I will tell you this: I think taking that Monday off last year was the only year I did it when we were at Akron. I think from a standpoint of giving them a day to academically just focus on school and um, putting the game to bed on Sunday, whatever happened, win or
Yeah.
lose, Saturday, putting that to bed. And then at the same time, you give them two opportunities to sleep in, right? So Saturday night, you start a little later on Sunday, so they're not waking
Yep.
up at 6 a.m. And then Monday they're off, so that's two nights to sleep, to sleep in.
Yep.
Versus if you practice on Monday, you're waking them up at 6 a.m. So
Yep.
to me, that's the best. I mean, if you're doing a morning schedule, I think as far as if we're just talking about sleep parameters, I think what you guys are doing is a brilliant way of doing it by giving them Monday that day off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
All right, I cut you off on Thursday. So tell me about so Thursday in season is what?
Yeah. So Wednesday's our last day, and that's more
Or
of a
Wednesday, sorry.
I'd call like our first clean of the week. First clean drive is more like strength speed ish, where our second one is a little bit more speed strength, and then we come into our bench press. That's the day we do our primary bench press, or really, excuse me. After clean, we'd follow up with pen lay rows, and we'd for the most part, I kind of hold the volume on all of our vertical pulls and our horizontal pulls. So we do our chins on Tuesday. We do our pen lay rows on Wednesday, and I kind of hold that volume consistent. Again,
Yeah.
15 total reps of work on each, and I just intensify. I give an RPE for the load on the chins, and then I have training maxes for pen lay row, and I just continue to progress the intensities linearly. And then that's the day that we'll follow up with bench press, and then following bench press is just that's kind of a day for us to try to do something to hold on to some lean mass. I'll plug in some general bodybuilding exercises. You know, you can always tell the kids whatever you want to tell them: TV arms, gun show. But we know at the end of the day, we're trying to do everything we can to hold on to as much lean mass as possible, create some type of increase in hormone control. And how I sell it to our kids really is, I'm trying to trick your body to go eat. That's one of the biggest things. We're always like uh, pulling their teeth out to get these kids to get over the cafeteria and eat. And whether they are or aren't hungry, it's just got to be important to them. So in my mind, it's work that comes with a very minimal cost. That's going to cause some type of a response that's going to make these guys hungry just because of the hormone production that kind of comes with it. Um, and then on that Wednesday lift, like I do one slight bit of hamstring work on the front end. I just do like hamstring iso march,
Yep.
almost like a stiff-legged hamstring
Yep.
iso march, and again, very low dose, just 5 reps in each leg. I build it onto the back end of the warm up, and that's the kind of when the hay is in the barn with me for my travel guys. Uh, and I've already gone pretty long-winded on this question, so I'll sum up the last piece pretty quick. So I've got 2 more levels of development. The black group is I kind of call them the Army Reserves. They're kind of like they're the guys that they're getting somewhere in the ballpark of 15 to 25 reps in a game,
Yep. Yep.
playing some marginal role, or maybe with one special team or multiple special teams, and kind of a backup to offense or defense. So they're in a developmental role, and those guys, based on maybe they start to turn the corner in practice, or maybe someone gets hurt. Those are the guys that get transitioned up to the gray card when necessary. Um, and those guys, it's a 4-day developmental program. They live somewhere we're talking Prilipin. They're living somewhere from Prilipin low to Prilipin optimal, depending on the lift we're talking about. So upper body will push closer optimal to high. If it's a lower body or Olympic lift, we're going to live somewhere closer to optimal to low. Where the red card is on the opposite side of that equation, there are our true developmental group, whether we're talking about red shirts or our scout team guys, and they're on a 4-day program as well. But this time of year, I'm not going to be able to get the guys on the field to develop linear speed or any other real quality. And truth be told, one of the reasons why those guys are being put in that group in the first place is um, from the coach's perspective, they're not physically developed quite enough yet. So it's an opportunity to kind of really sow those seeds in the in-season period. And I mean, it's going to be one of the longest uninterrupted periods of training we've got. So those guys, for the gist of their intensive work, they'll live somewhere. Really, they're living on the Prilipin high range for the gist of their training. Some of the more intensive work will be closer to optimal, but Then I really kind of push the envelope from a volume perspective. We kind of start there, and we really progress some of the ways that we load those guys from a volume perspective in a way that I never would a time of year where we're using more of a vertical integration approach where sprints are being we're high speed running, change of direction, extensive tempo runs, um, jumps, throws, a lot of other qualities are being developed at the same time. With this, these guys essentially are just a moving bag at practice. So
Right.
there's not a whole lot of stress happening at practice. I can't develop them on the field in any way, shape, or form. So I truly push the envelope with those guys from a volume perspective, and it's gone well for us. And the guys kind of take pride in it.
With
So
that black group, with them not playing a ton in on Saturdays, are you doing any conditioning, any tempos with them outside of that to make sure that if a guy goes down, they're ready, or does practice take care of that, or what's your philosophy on that?
well, so practice still takes care of because those guys are guys. They're living in that 2 to 3, or not usually not 2, usually like the 3 to 4 man role, and they're still going to get plenty of reps in practice.
Yeah.
And we're air raid offense, which means our defense is
Yep.
also going to practice against an air raid offense daily. So that's taken care of by itself
Yep.
every single day.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the very first thing I think you said is like so much of what you do is dependent on the guy you work for. Um, Programs are so, I mean, they're constantly evolving depending on so many variables that we don't control whatsoever. And why I think it's even more important to be open-minded and always willing to adapt your program to those things. Um, Perform X, just I wrote this down. Do you do any jumps or anything like that with those in the off season? And if so, what do you do?
So I actually just got them in the spring. So I've not gotten in any jumps with them. My staff and myself, we've played around with them a little bit, and we've thought about where some of those things may fit. Um, like for instance, we did a little bit of French contrast work in what we call like our realization block, where like strength, speed, strength, power, just power development is kind of our central training quality. That's a place where that may fit for us. But right now, it's not something that we've looked too hard into. The gist of where we really used the bands this summer was more so like strength, speed work on the bench and the squat,
Yeah, same.
and in season, it's just more so like how I think of like how I progress from straight weight to the safety bar, to the safety bar with bands, to safety bar with chains. We just finished the block with chains. Now we're going to actually go into a block with the weight releasers. Um, how I look at it really is like I call it like sub circa max effort. If you know Louis, we're going to get those top end loads of 90 to 100%, 95 to 105%. Where in the bottom we're going to get closer to 60 to 80% straight weight. So that's how I use it this time of year, and for the most part, that's the only time of year I'll really use the bands or the chains for that. The just of the time I use bands will be more so like dedicated dynamic effort barbell work.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I love the bands. We use them in the same fashion. I just, I think that's part of me is like, man, we have all these bands. We should be doing jumps with them, but I don't know. I mean, I just, like in some form of a contrast, like I like the idea of a resisted vertical jump, but I'm
Yeah,
not like a big, like, let's do repetitive 20 vertical jumps and line hops with bands attached to our hips. And
no doubt.
I, I can't, I think the belts are, we got to do something about those belts. Like the belts that the bands hook up to. Have you messed around with them at all?
I didn't even spend any of our money on that. I solely went for the bench and the squat bands.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
knew that wasn't going to fit in. If I were to do the jumps, I would honestly I'd use the lighter bands with the highest loop, and I would
yeah,
just connect it to a barbell and do a
yeah.
barbell squat jump.
That's where I most likely am with it. At least for now, and where we are, like in the long term of maybe year 3 or year 4, I'll start getting into that stuff. But to me, I just feel like there's still so many things we need to get better at that take priority before that I don't. We'll get there, but right now I just don't think so. So as you're going through this in-season program, how much of it, and I'm sure you're probably starting to think, if you haven't already, written about off-season stuff. What am I going to do? Where are we going to start? How much does what you see in season on the field, as far as actual performance, in the weight room, as far as deficiencies, whatever it may be, how much does that have to do with what you program for January or February whenever you guys get back?
I think, to be honest, the thing that sticks out to the most to me of how I would go about changes in the off season is like a great place first is to look at the injury report. I think the injury report is a piece of information that some people think of as like the worst burden to them, but it can provide you with some great information. And again, none of these things are 100% in your control. They give you some information as to what are some places maybe we can put an emphasis on. And another thing, like you think about the length of the season from fall camp all the way up to the end of the regular season. If you go to a bowl game or playoffs, whatever the case may be, what are some of the just natural structural changes that are happening with the body to protect itself? Wrists, shoulders, hips, ankles, and some of those concepts kind of play into like, okay, what are some of the things that need to take a precedent in that first period of loading in terms of restoring movement quality in a very general way before intensifying those loads later down the road. So I think a big thing is obviously like coming into January, like full range of motion needs to be king at that point in time because those are things that we need to restore. And at that time of year, like you said, you guys had 8 weeks off. The guys aren't going to walk in after being off for 8 weeks and put 90% on their back. So it's an awesome opportunity to promote changes in lean muscle mass by giving them the greatest range of motions possible with volumes that they can tolerate extensively versus once you start getting to prep in zone 4, obviously the total amount of volume you can put on a kid is a little bit different. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things as far as what can happen in the weight room. I think
Yeah.
the bigger picture is looking at how the kids move and kind of um, just taking that into consideration with what you do with them on the field. Maybe you see that you're a very physical team, but you'd wish your kids ran a little bit better. So maybe that gives you a little bit of information that maybe you need to spend a certain amount of volume or a little bit less volume in the weight room to allow you to carry a little bit greater volume on the field. Because obviously those things, it's a great balancing act in itself. So I think that's one of the bigger things that kind of I take in consideration looking at what's happening on the field that may change what's going to happen come January, February, March, April, May, June, July.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing I've done every year of my career is at the end of the season, I sit down with my staff and we record every injury that's happened in the season and we go through every single one. And I've definitely gotten better at this, but it's a balance. I used to try to rationalize every injury. Um, this is why this had to have happened. This is on us. We got to do better. This one, that no way, that couldn't have been us. No way. Um, to where now I look for trends, right? You look for
Yeah,
trends at the same time, like our body and what goes into injury. There's so many variables and it is so
yeah,
complex. The human body is such an irrational system that to sit there and try to rationalize it's impossible.
yep,
Um, and so I think it's a balance, and it's something I've definitely gotten better at. But I'm telling you, like 2 years, 3 years ago, I used to sit there with that injury report, and I used to try to find a rationalization for every single thing on that list. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think I think that too many people lie on either ends of those spectrums, right? Like what I just said, or no, screw that. Injuries have nothing to do with it. We have nothing to do with those. The
yep,
strength coach that wants to claim the team that's healthy, but as soon as guys start going down, nope, that could have been us. That wasn't us. And I think that's as a
yeah,
strength coach, if you're going to sit there and go, we only have one starter out, and it's week 8. If you're going to sit there and claim that, then in 2 years, when you happen to get 3 ACLs, because that shit happens. I don't care
yep.
what you
There's
do,
no
shit
doubt.
happens. You better be willing to claim it then too. You know what I
Yep.
mean? That's one thing I talk to a lot of coaches about, or I hear coaches say, like, try to claim when things are good. I'm like, okay, that's fine. If you're that guy, that's good. But then when things get bad, own it too. Because I'm telling you,
Mhm.
it happens, right? I mean, you know it, you've seen it, you've been in this for how long? Like
Yep.
those years, they happen. I don't care how good your program is. This is football. It is we're dealing with kids that are 18 to 22 years old that have crazy habits that we can't control, variables that aren't with us 22 hours a day on a highly intense contact sport. There are going to be years that you just it happens.
Yeah,
And
it's extremely multifactorial.
oh my
Just
god,
just looking at the game itself, not taking into consideration any other habitual um, any habits these kids kind of bring, whether how they sleep, how they eat, how they hydrate, what they put in their body that we wouldn't recommend. There's so many things that come into the picture, and sometimes shit just happens too.
yeah,
And that's just part of it. And again, I think the most important quality that we want to develop is the athlete to be available. Availability is the most important quality, but some of those things are out of our control, and that's where I think again for us, we want to develop strength, power, speed. But like taking a page from Oliver Meal, we want to prepare the athletes for the stressors that they're going to be exposed to day in, day out, and in practice and in competition, and we want them to be able to recover from it. So that's where having a model of how we apply stress throughout the year and using it to kind of guide us sets us up for our like again our best practice,
yeah,
our best chance of success. A great example, like just look at something as simple as like sprint yards. Like for me, I don't have GPS, but my boss happens to run a very similar offense to a school I worked at 2 jobs ago in the Pac-12, where I was able to handle a lot of the catapult data monitoring and what the information I presented to the coaches. And not only do we run a similar offense, but our script almost is identical.
yeah.
What we do day in, day out. So it allows me to at least have somewhat of a bird's eye perspective of the amount of stress these guys are going to be exposed to daily, weekly, whether we're talking fall camp, in season. And I mean, if we really think about what summer training is for us, really what summer training is preparing the athletes for fall camp, because the only stimulus that they're going to be adapted to by the time game one really comes around is what actually happened in fall camp.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, we're going to be in fall camp for somewhere between 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Go look at Isherin's block periodization books and look at all the training decay, the decays of different training qualities. A lot of those things at that point are going to be out of our hand, outside of the small sliver that is ours once we reach the in-season period. So really, we're preparing for fall camp, so we should be using that information that we were able to collect to help set the athletes up for the best chances of success, not only to like just survive a practice, but to be able to recover from it and come back the next day, because we know that fall camp, for the most part, fall camp every day is Monday, right? Because like when we get in season, there's a natural regression in the amount of work from Tuesday
Yeah.
to Wednesday to Thursday to Friday to peaking for Saturday. Well, fall camp every day is Monday. It's Groundhog Day. So we've got to make sure that the stress we're put on these kids isn't just a stress that they can just survive from. It's a stress that they can recover from and come back the next day and do it again.
I love that. In camp every day is, well, our hard day of the week is Tuesday, but in camp every day is Tuesday. That's one I wrote down.
Yeah.
Coach, now you got anything I missed? Any questions?
Yeah, sure. So I think, Coach, just kind of getting to where, building off your last point right there, just kind of looking at some of the training decay stuff and trying to make sure that we're keeping a good exposure to it and stuff. One thing that we constantly get back and go back and forth on here is talking about speed exposure and trying to make sure that we're giving our guys enough of a stimulus to high speed sprinting, but not so much that it overworks them, but enough so that when they are asked to do it in practice or in a game, it's not a foreign thing to them, right? So I just wanted to kind of hear your thoughts on how that fits into your program, maybe throughout the whole off season with just regards towards exposing your athletes to high speed.
Yeah. So again, we use a like a Charlie Francis high-low model, and for the just of the off season from January up until the summertime, we're going to be on a 4-day look: Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Where Mondays and Thursdays, we'll always start our mornings on the field. Weights will always follow sprints and any extensive work that we do on the field. So Mondays and Thursdays are always going to be days that we sprint, jump, and throw on the field. Certain times of the year, both those days will be tailored to acceleration. For the most part, it's going to be very early off season because obviously you're not going to be able to get those hamstrings to tolerate any type of max V work from the jump. So you kind of start to grade those exposures through your acceleration work where you're not going to kind of touch some of those velocities or some of those eccentric stresses that you may apply once you start getting into upright running. And then as we kind of naturally progress, we move into like an acceleration dominant day and a max V dominant day, where our opposite days, or those days, we bucket the stress. So those are our intensity days in the weight room too. Those are the days where we're going to do our Olympic lifts, our squats, our hinges, and Tuesdays and Fridays are going to be more extensive in nature. Certain times of year we'll use that as an opportunity to kind of do some, less intensive change of direction type technique stuff. And then we'll follow that up with extensive tempo runs. And then those are the days that we follow with upper body weights in the weight room.
Yeah.
And then as we move into the summer, I've got the guys for 5 weeks. I don't have them for both summer sessions, but I've got them for one summer session. So I've got them for 5 weeks. So how I look at that is weeks
What
one
is
and
that?
two.
5 weeks going into camp, or is it what 5 weeks do you have them?
So we've got them for 5 weeks of June and July, and I lose them for 3 weeks before coming into camp.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. But I mean, again, control what you can control, right? So you've got to think about what type of stress can you apply on those guys to get them as ready for camp as possible. And really, part of that, there's a fine line to it. Is we got to make sure that on week 5, we've squeezed every drop of juice out of that orange possible. We truly have to functionally overreach these guys by week 5, so that 3 weeks later they're ready to go. Because we know, as well as I do, more the chances that they're going to actually do the program you send home with them to a T or at all are marginal.
How do you block that with that 5 weeks? Like, do you just try to push through without a deload because they have 3 weeks, or how do you do that?
So what I do is I look at, and they're coming off of being off for half of May as well.
Right.
So I use the first 2 weeks, and again, like there's a fine, like knowing what they are prepared to handle, and we got 5 weeks, so you can't start too hot, right? Because you might create too much fatigue. You might cook them too much in the first week, and not have anything come week 2, week 3. So I start the first 2 weeks on a 4-day model, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And that third week, I transition to a 5-day model. And that third week is a quasi deload, is how I put it, because we're only coming off of 2 weeks of work. So I don't deload quite as hard, where other times of year, my deload parameters are 50% volume, 90% of the preceding intensity. And that includes field work as well. But that third week was like a quasi deload, and the start of our 5-day model, where Monday, Wednesday, Friday now it becomes high, Tuesday, Thursday becomes low.
All right.
And again, both on the field and in the weight room. So what that would look like would be, Monday being our RSA grid day, Tuesday being our long extensive tempo, Wednesday being like a more of a short burst change of direction, alactic capacity session, Thursday being our short extensive tempo, and Friday what we call pattern runs, similar to what Yancey McKnight does at UT, where it's a generalized alactic capacity session. It's kind of fit to a game model, and how I program up my alactic capacity work really for my Wednesday and Friday is based off of the one piece of data I definitely do have is repetitions in practice, live reps, not indie, but like live reps. So I use that as a means to periodize up to those volumes to what they have to tolerate for practice. My extensive tempo volumes, I periodize that based off of that previous GPS data that I had for each of those different position groups. I use that the buckets, basically the velocity buckets, bucket three all the way to the top bucket is how I program my extensive tempo yardage. So I use that as means, okay, these guys not only have to be able to run 2,400 yards a day, but they've got to be able to recover from it, come back the next day and do it again. So I think about, usually that ends up being, it was for our skill guys at that Pac-12 school. It was somewhere around 1,200 to 1,300 yards a day. So in that, again, that's buckets three and up. So not including like walking, light jog, so closer to like tempo-ish yardage to sprint yardage. So I use that as a means to kind of periodize out my extensive tempo work. And then for my RSA and my sprint volume, that's where I look at those buckets of high-speed running. Okay, they've got to be able to sprint this much and recover from it the next day. And I use that through our ALAC power or true linear speed development days to build up into that. And then as we transition to really pushing the repeat sprint ability, I start to use that to really kind of push that envelope in terms of the total amount of sprint yards they can tolerate and recover from. And so again, I start that model, that 5-day model, week 3, but it's like a quasi deload. And then week 4, week 5, obviously still a gradual increase into week 4, week 5, we truly push that envelope to the max. And that's how I've had to do it the past 2 off seasons here.
No, that's incredible. But man, the transparency I really appreciate. There's unfortunately there's not enough people out there like you that are just willing to share things, and how transparent you just were for the last hour, man. I really appreciate it. And I got a whole page of notes here, a bunch of stuff I wrote down, and I know anybody that gets the opportunity to listen to this is going to get so much more out of it because of what you're willing to share. I think it's a important time just for people to continue to realize that, like, there's nothing secretive about any of this stuff. It's all stolen from somebody else, and we're all here to share and try to make our athletes better. But I respect the hell out of people that are willing to be transparent and just share things and get into details. So thank you so much for sharing, man. I really think it's important for this, but just the subliminal message behind it of that you're willing to do that. I think it means a lot for our industry as well. So appreciate what you do, man. Appreciate your time today. And like I said, I really appreciate your transparency as well.
No, I appreciate you. Thanks for having me. Look forward to catching up with you next time. We always have our good in-season talk, so we're a year away from it happening again.
No doubt. All right, man. I appreciate you, Coach. Thank you so much.
All right, sweet.
Yeah.